"I'm starving for a man's touch," the tall Apache girl said, the lone farmer. The land was wide and quiet, stretching farther than the eye could see. The soil was dry but honest, the kind that only gave back what someone was willing to work for. A lone farmer lived there, far away from busy towns and loud voices. His small farmhouse stood near the edge of his fields, weathered by years of sun, wind, and silence. Every morning he woke before the sky fully changed color, washed his face with cold water, and stepped outside to greet another day that looked almost the same as the one before. He had chosen this life, or at least that was what he told himself. The truth was more complicated. Years ago, life had been fuller. There had been laughter, shared meals, and dreams spoken out loud. But time has a way of taking things without asking. Loss came quietly, leaving behind habits, routines, and long evenings with no one to talk to. The farmer learned to live with that quiet. He worked hard, kept his head down, and avoided thinking too much about what was missing. His days were filled with simple tasks: fixing fences, feeding animals, watching the clouds move slowly across the sky. At night, he ate alone at a small wooden table, listening to the wind brushing against the walls of his house. Sometimes he would sit outside after dinner, staring into the distance, feeling something heavy but unnamed resting in his chest. He didn't talk about loneliness. Men like him rarely did. Instead, he carried it like a tool. Always there, never spoken about. Not far from his land, across hills and open paths, lived a tall Apache woman. Her life had been shaped by strength from an early age. She stood taller than most, her posture straight, her presence noticeable even when she said nothing. People often mistook her quiet nature for coldness, but inside, her emotions ran deep. She carried stories passed down through generations, lessons about survival, respect, and resilience. Yet none of those teachings prepared her for the kind of loneliness that grows when the heart has too much space and nowhere to rest. She lived with independence, relying on herself for almost everything. She knew how to fix what broke, how to walk long distances without tiring, and how to remain calm when life tested her patience. But when night fell and the world grew still, she felt the ache of isolation more clearly. She missed conversation that went beyond polite words. She missed being seen, not just for her strength, but for her softness too. People around her admired her from a distance, but rarely tried to understand her. Some were intimidated, others held old ideas and quiet judgments. Over time, she learned to keep her thoughts to herself. She focused on daily responsibilities and pushed emotional needs aside. Still, there were moments, brief but powerful, when the weight of being alone felt heavier than usual. On one such day, the sky was overcast, and the air carried a strange stillness. The woman walked along the dirt path that cut through the land near the farmer's fields. She had taken that path many times before, always keeping her distance, always aware of the quiet man who worked the land. She noticed his routine, his steady movements, the way he treated the soil with care. He didn't look like someone who wasted words, but there was something honest about him that caught her attention. The farmer noticed her too, though he never said anything. He saw her walking tall against the horizon, her presence strong but calm. Unlike others who passed through, she didn't rush. She moved with purpose, as if she belonged to the land as much as he did. He wondered about her sometimes, usually in brief thoughts he quickly pushed away. Curiosity felt dangerous after so many years of emotional distance. That day, their paths crossed more closely than usual. A broken fence had forced the farmer to work near the edge of his land. At the same time, the woman's path led her closer than before. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. The wind moved through the grass, filling the space words had not yet entered. They exchanged a simple greeting. Nothing more. Yet even that small interaction felt different. There was no rush, no tension, just two people acknowledging each other's presence. The farmer noticed her voice was calm but carried weight shaped by experience. The woman noticed his eyes held a tired kindness, the kind that comes from enduring more than one talks about. As they went their separate ways, both felt something linger. Not excitement, not romance, just awareness. Awareness that the other existed beyond a passing figure in the distance. Awareness that loneliness, when shared silently, feels slightly lighter. Later that evening, the farmer found himself distracted. He overcooked his meal, something he rarely did. His thoughts drifted back to the woman, her steady voice, her confident walk. He told himself it was nothing, just a moment. Yet he felt a quiet shift inside, like a door cracking open after years of being shut. The woman, too, felt unsettled in a way she hadn't expected. As she prepared for the night, her mind replayed the brief exchange. She wasn't used to being noticed without judgment, without expectation. The farmer had looked at her not as something unfamiliar, but simply as another human being standing in the same quiet world. Both returned to their routines the next day, but something had changed. The land looked the same, the work remained the same, yet the silence felt different. It was no longer empty, it was waiting. Neither of them knew what that meant yet. They only knew that two lonely lives, shaped by distance and restraint, had begun to move closer without either realizing it. And in that quiet beginning, where nothing dramatic happened and no promises were made, the foundation of something real was slowly forming. The days that followed did not change on the surface, but beneath the routine, something quiet had begun to move. The farmer returned to his fields each morning, yet his thoughts no longer stayed only on the soil and weather. From time to time, his eyes drifted toward the dirt path near the edge of his land. He told himself it was just habit, but deep down he knew he was watching for the tall woman who walked there with such calm strength. She continued her daily routines as well, keeping herself busy with work and responsibilities. Still, her steps slowed whenever she neared the farmland. She noticed small details she had ignored before, the way the crops lined up neatly, the repaired fence, the steady care put into land that asked for patience. She recognized that kind of effort. It reminded her of the way she had learned to survive, quietly, carefully, without expecting praise. Their second meeting happened naturally, without planning. Farmer was repairing a tool near his shed when he noticed her standing a short distance away. She hesitated, clearly unsure whether to interrupt. Wiped his hands, straightened his back, and nodded at her. This time, the greeting felt less strange. They spoke a few simple words, nothing heavy, just polite conversation about the weather and the land. The woman mentioned she had been walking farther lately, learning the paths better. The farmer listened more than he spoke, something he was used to doing. He found that he didn't feel the need to rush the conversation. Silence filled the gaps gently, not like a wall, but like space to breathe. They talked about work, about how land teaches patience. The woman spoke of responsibility and independence without naming loneliness, yet it was there in the spaces between her words. The farmer understood without needing her to explain. He knew that feeling well, the kind that grows when days pass without real connection. As they spoke, both became aware of time moving differently. Minutes passed unnoticed. The sun shifted slightly in the sky before either of them realized how long they had been standing there. When the conversation finally ended, it felt unfinished, like a sentence paused in the middle. After she left, the farmer returned to his work, but his hands moved slower. His mind replayed the sound of her voice, steady and honest. He didn't remember the last time he had looked forward to a conversation. The realization unsettled him, but it also warmed something deep inside. The woman walked away feeling a similar pull. She wasn't used to being listened to without interruption or expectation. The farmer hadn't tried to impress her or ask questions that crossed boundaries. He had simply been present. That small thing stayed with her longer than she expected. Their meetings became more frequent, though. Neither of them planned it that way. Sometimes it was just a brief exchange. Other times they spoke longer, sharing small pieces of their lives. They avoided the past at first, circling around it carefully as if both sensed that certain stories required trust before being spoken aloud. One afternoon, the farmer offered her water when the sun grew too strong. She accepted without hesitation. They sat on opposite sides of a wooden bench, close enough to feel each other's presence, but not close enough to feel crowded. The land around them was quiet, and for once, neither felt the need to fill it with words. That day marked a change. The woman began to open up, slowly and thoughtfully. She spoke about growing up learning to rely on herself, about standing tall not just in body but in spirit. She spoke of being admired yet misunderstood, of strength that people respected but rarely embraced. The farmer listened with care. He didn't try to fix anything or offer empty comfort. He simply acknowledged her experiences. In return, he shared pieces of his own life, his years of working the land, the loss that had reshaped his world, and the way silence had become both a shield and a burden. With each shared story, something softened between them. Trust did not arrive suddenly. It grew like the crops around them, slow, steady, and rooted in patience. They learned each other's rhythms. The woman noticed the farmer's quiet humor, the way his eyes changed when he spoke about the land. He noticed her thoughtful pauses, the strength behind her calm expressions. Yet beneath their growing connection, both felt fear. The farmer worried about allowing himself to want something more. He had lived so long without hope that even the idea of it felt risky. The woman feared vulnerability. Independence had protected her, but it had also kept her alone. There were moments when they almost pulled away. Moments when conversation drifted too close to feelings neither felt ready to name. During those times, they stepped back slightly, respecting the invisible lines between them. But the distance never lasted long. Something stronger kept drawing them back. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and purple, they stood quietly watching the day end. The woman spoke first, her voice low and honest. She said loneliness does not always come from being alone. It comes from being unseen. The farmer nodded, understanding deeply. That simple truth connected them more than any long explanation could. They stood there, two adults shaped by different lives, finding common ground in shared emotional hunger. No promises were made. No boundaries were crossed. Yet something meaningful settled between them, solid and real. As night approached, they parted ways once again. This time, the silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt full of possibility, of questions yet to be answered. Both returned to their homes with hearts heavier than before, but not from sadness, from awareness. They now knew they were no longer alone in the way they once had been, and that knowledge, quiet and fragile, marked the true beginning of something neither had expected, but both were slowly learning to welcome. Time moved forward in a quiet but steady way. The connection between the farmer and the tall Apache woman grew deeper, not through big moments, but through small, meaningful ones. They met more often now, sometimes by chance, sometimes because both silently hoped the other would be there. Neither of them said it out loud, but their days felt lighter when they knew they might cross paths. They began to share parts of their lives that they had never shared with anyone else. The woman spoke about her childhood, about learning responsibility early, about being taught to stand strong no matter what. She explained how strength was praised, but softness was rarely welcomed. She admitted that over time she learned to hide her need for comfort, believing that wanting connection was a weakness. The farmer listened closely, never interrupting. He understood more than he expected to. When it was his turn, he spoke about his past, with honesty but without bitterness. He shared how he once believed life would turn out differently, how loss had taught him to lower his expectations just to survive. He admitted that he had built his life around work because it was easier than facing empty evenings. As these conversations unfolded, they both noticed changes within themselves. The woman felt safer expressing thoughts she once kept buried. The farmer felt emotions returning that he thought had faded forever. Neither rushed the process. They allowed trust to grow naturally, knowing that forcing it would only break what they were building. There were days when they simply worked side by side. The woman offered help without being asked, and the farmer accepted without pride. They spoke less during these moments, letting shared effort replace conversation. It felt comfortable, like something they had done many times before, even though it was new. Yet with closeness came fear. The woman sometimes pulled back emotionally, afraid that opening her heart would lead to disappointment. She had spent years protecting herself. Letting someone in felt unfamiliar and risky. The farmer noticed her hesitation, but chose patience over pressure. He knew too well how fear could shape behavior. The farmer struggled in his own way. He worried that he had forgotten how to be part of someone else's life. He questioned whether he deserved connection after so many years of isolation. At times, he almost convinced himself to step away, believing it would be easier to return to solitude than to risk losing something he had only just found. One afternoon, tension quietly surfaced. A simple misunderstanding led to silence between them for several days. The farmer felt the absence deeply, more than he expected. The woman, too, felt unsettled. The quiet that once felt familiar now felt heavy and uncomfortable. Eventually, the woman returned to the path near the fields. She didn't know what she would say, only that she could no longer ignore what she felt. The farmer saw her approaching and felt a mix of relief and nervousness. When they spoke, their words were careful but honest. They acknowledged the distance without blame. That conversation, though difficult, strengthened their bond. For the first time, the woman admitted how hard it was for her to trust anyone with her feelings. The farmer admitted that he feared losing connection more than being alone. These truths, once spoken, removed a weight neither realized they were carrying. From that moment, something shifted. Their connection felt more balanced, more open. They began to understand each other not just through shared loneliness, but through shared courage. Courage to speak. Courage to stay. As the seasons slowly changed, the relationship continued to grow. They laughed more easily now. They shared quiet jokes, exchanged thoughtful glances, and understood each other's moods without explanation. Their bond was built on respect, not expectation. Still, neither spoke of the future. The unspoken question hovered between them. What were they becoming to each other? The woman wondered if this connection could truly last. The farmer wondered if he was ready to let his life change. One evening, as they sat watching the sun lower behind the fields, the woman spoke softly. She said, "That strength does not mean never needing anyone. Sometimes, strength means allowing yourself to be seen." The farmer nodded, deeply moved. He replied that solitude teaches survival, but connection teaches living. Sat in silence after that, letting the words settle. No decisions were made. No promises were spoken, but both understood that they were standing at a turning point. As they parted that night, the air felt different, heavier with emotion, but also warmer. They both sensed that what they shared was no longer just companionship. It was something deeper, something that asked for honesty and courage. They returned to their homes knowing that their lives were no longer moving in separate lines. The question was no longer whether they felt connected, but whether they were brave enough to see where that connection might lead. And in that quiet uncertainty, both felt something new rising. Hope, fragile but real, waiting for its chance to grow. The connection they shared now felt too real to ignore. What once lived quietly between short conversations and shared silences had grown into something that demanded attention. Both the farmer and the tall Apache woman felt it, even when neither spoke about it directly. Their meetings carried more weight now. Every word mattered more. Every pause felt longer. With that closeness came pressure. The woman began to sense the eyes of others when she walked the familiar paths. People noticed that she spent time near the farmer's land. Some looked with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. She had lived her life facing unspoken opinions, but this felt different. This time, the attention touched something personal. The farmer felt his own kind of tension. For years he had lived unnoticed, comfortable in his isolation. Now, change stood close, asking something of him. He worried about what it would mean to let someone fully into his life. His home, his habits, his carefully controlled world, none of it had room for uncertainty. They both tried to act as though nothing had changed, but emotion has a way of showing itself. Conversations sometimes ended too soon. Other times words carried hidden meanings neither meant to reveal. The air between them grew heavy with feelings left unspoken. One afternoon the woman arrived later than usual. Her steps were slower, her expression more guarded. The farmer noticed immediately. When he asked if everything was all right, she hesitated before answering. She spoke of feeling torn between the independence she had built and the connection she was beginning to need. Her honesty unsettled him, not because it was unwelcome, but because it mirrored his own fears. He admitted that he had spent so long protecting himself from loss that he no longer knew how to open his life to another person. Saying it out loud made the truth feel heavier. That conversation did not bring comfort. Instead, it revealed the difficult choices ahead. Neither wanted to walk away, but neither knew how to move forward without risking pain. For the first time since they met, distance seemed possible. In the days that followed, they saw each other less. Not out of anger, but out of confusion. The woman focused on her responsibilities, telling herself she needed clarity. The farmer threw himself into work, using exhaustion as a way to quiet his thoughts. Yet, silence did not bring peace. It only sharpened the absence they both felt. The land reflected their moods. The sky felt heavier, the wind colder. The farmer noticed how empty his evenings felt without her presence. The woman found herself replaying conversations, wondering if she had asked for too much or said too little. One evening, the woman stopped walking the path altogether. She chose a longer route, hoping distance would bring strength. Instead, it brought loneliness sharper than before. She realized that independence had kept her safe, but it had also kept her apart. The farmer noticed her absence immediately. Days passed, and the path remained empty. The quiet he once knew returned, but it no longer felt familiar. It felt hollow. He understood then that his life had already changed, whether he accepted it or not. Driven by a feeling he could no longer ignore, the farmer left his land and followed the longer path he knew she sometimes took. When he finally saw her standing near the edge of the hills, he felt both fear and relief. They spoke honestly that evening, with no careful words or guarded pauses. The woman admitted she was afraid of losing herself as she allowed connection to define her. The farmer admitted he was afraid of losing someone again after learning to care. There were no easy answers, but there was truth. And in that truth, they found respect. They agreed that fear should not decide their future. Avoiding pain had already cost them enough. The woman spoke about balance, about standing strong while allowing support. The farmer spoke about rebuilding, about making room in his life for change. Their words did not erase uncertainty, but they softened it. As night fell, they stood quietly, knowing that this moment mattered. The choice ahead was not simple. It required courage from both of them. Courage to be seen, courage to risk disappointment, courage to believe that connection was worth the effort. They parted that night without promises, but with something stronger than promises: understanding. The distance between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like space they could cross if they chose to. Both returned home knowing that the next step would define everything. The question was no longer whether they cared for each other. It was whether they were ready to let fear stop them. And deep inside, both already knew the answer.